So why don't we get started?
Okay.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Shannon. I'm the executive director of the Lincoln County Historical Association, and I'm so excited to welcome you tonight. Thank you for joining us. I'm absolutely delighted to have you here. This is the first lecture in our 2026 Winter Online Lecture Series, and I'm still getting used to saying 26. That seems strange. The series has been wonderfully successful over the past few years, and we are proud to continue offering these programs online, thanks to our sponsor, J. Edward Knight Insurance. We're deeply grateful to them for their support. They're a company with a long history in our region, a strong commitment to the community, and their generosity is making this program possible, which is super cool. So thanks to them, we're making this completely free, open to the public. I do want to let you know we're a small nonprofit. We rely heavily on community support, and every gift we receive goes directly back into the work that we do, serving the public through museums, preservation, and our history-based programs. We are the steward of three historic houses. So we run the 1754 Chapman Hall House in Damariscotta, the 1761 Pownell Courthouse in Dresden, and the 1811 Old Jail in Wiscasset with its attached 1839 Jailer's House. So these are all in Maine, in Lincoln County, Maine. In addition to that, we do year-round educational programs. So your support, if you do choose to make a donation, would support our mission in that work. And we invite you to consider doing that through our website at lincolncountyhistory.org. As far as tonight's talk is concerned, a few housekeeping notes. Basically, we just ask that you please keep yourself on mute. And what we will do is ask you to put questions in the chat, which is the box at the bottom of your screen. As your questions come up, just feel free to go ahead and send those to me, and I would be happy to read them to Amy after her presentation. So as I said, we are officially launching our 2026 series. I'm super pleased to welcome author Amy Gagnon-Fogg, who I've been chatting with a little bit and is just absolutely lovely to talk with. And I can tell that she's really passionate and brings a deep personal connection to the work that she's going to speak about tonight. She is the great niece of Paul M. Lavoie. I think I've said that right, or maybe Lavoie, who's buried at Henri-Chapelle in Belgium, and she's the founder of They Speak, Voices of Henri-Chapelle American Cemetery, a project dedicated to preserving the stories and the photographs of the men who are honored there. Through her years of research, compassion, and commitment, she's given voice to service members whose lives and sacrifices deserve to be remembered, not just names carved into stone, but as sons, brothers, husbands, and friends. And I am truly honored to present her to you this evening, or to introduce her for you this evening. And Amy, thank you so much for sharing your time with us and your work. It's a privilege to welcome you. And I will stop talking and pass it on to you now.
Thank you, Shannon. It's always an honor for me to speak about Henri-Chapelle American Cemetery and the men who are interred or commemorated at this cemetery. This is only my second webinar, and I'm used to an in-live person, so I miss seeing everybody's faces out there, but I appreciate all of you who have joined us tonight. So the beginning of this project actually started in 2009. I was driving home from work one night, and I had the thought that appeared in my mind, that came to my mind, of Find Paul. And at the time, I was working on a project in Lithuania, trying to help a friend locate his family shtetl in eastern Lithuania. And so I ignored the thought to find Paul because I was busy in Lithuania, and I didn't know who Paul was. But the thought persisted and persisted until finally I contacted my aunt and tried to find out who this Paul person was that kept coming to mind. So Paul was actually born March 8th, 1923 in Nashua, New Hampshire. He was my paternal grandmother's younger brother, and he was one of 18 children born to my great-grandparents, French Canadian immigrants who migrated to America in 1909. Like I said, Paul was 3 years younger than my paternal grandmother, Yvette. And Paul was actually preceded in death by 8 siblings, and he was actually the Paul number 3 of the family. My great grandmother Marie really liked the name Paul, so the first 2 Pauls passed away, and she named this one Paul as well. And when I started this project, he had 3 living siblings alive at the time, and I asked them, questions, and all the family talked about when they mentioned Paul was he died somewhere over there, and he is buried over there somewhere. His siblings at the time, they have since passed, but when I did interview them, they remembered him as a clean, quiet boy who was a good fixer. My great grandmother, Marie Lavoie, she depended on Paul and his ability to fix things, and he was known as his mother's sweetheart boy. He worked at the local shoe shop in Nashua and at the hospital prior to entering the military. Paul loved to take his nieces and nephews swimming at a local pond in Hollis, New Hampshire. And his death was a total devastation, hence the silence about him. So this is Paul here, my great grandmother. This is actually my grandmother and my grandfather, her, and they're just having a fun day at the beach. So this is a family photo, a Lavoie family photo taken in 1942. Here's Paul right here. And as you can see, he already had an older brother named Jerry who was already in the military. And Paul and Jerry had a chance encounter meeting at Camp Polk in Louisiana prior to both of them shipping out to Europe. Jerry did survive. He made it all the way into Berlin. And this is my grandmother right here, Yvette. So Paul entered the military in March of 1943. He first served with a medical detachment in France. And somewhere, and I don't know why, and I probably will never know why, Paul requested a transfer to the infantry. And so this photo here was taken when he was still serving in France with the medical detachment. The military granted his request, and he was transferred to the 309th Infantry Regiment of the 78th Division, Company C, in January of 1945, just 3 weeks before his death. And Paul was killed in action February 10th, 1945, in Schmidt, Germany, just over the border from Belgium. And the battle at the time was at the Schwamenwald Dam in Germany. So of the 309th 78th Division, Companies A and B made it down to the dam. Company C, the one that Paul was assigned to, was held back over here in the woods. To be honest, I think Paul was killed on February 8th, because at the time, the research shows that his company, Company C, wasn't even at the dam on the 10th. And I think that he died February 8th in reserve. And also, too, on his IDPF, his individual deceased personnel file from the military, his date of death originally was the 8th of February, and somebody crossed it off and wrote 10th. So Uncle Paul, he was first interred at U.S. Military Cemetery Henri-Chapelle on the 18th of February of 45. So it took about 8 days for the members of the grave registration unit to reach his point and to collect the casualties. So at this temporary military cemetery, it was filled to capacity by the end of March of 45. And at that particular temporary cemetery, there were 17,000 Americans, 191 Allied soldiers, and 10,000 German soldiers. And the military cemetery, Henri-Chapelle, was located 70 miles southeast of Brussels in Homburg, Belgium. It's right along the border with Germany. And I did ask one time, why wasn't the cemetery named U.S. military cemetery, Homburg. And the reason was that the military thought that American families would think that their soldiers and ex-family members were interred in Homburg, Germany, and not Belgium. So they picked Henri-Chapelle, which is the village right next to Homburg, and so the cemetery was between the two villages. So this is a picture of the U.S. military cemetery, Henri-Chapelle, the temporary cemetery. And this image, this picture was actually sent home to the family members. And this particular one actually was sent home to the family of Joseph Fisher. Joseph Fisher was from Lewiston, Maine, and his brother fortunately saved all of the letters and documents that Joe had sent home, V-mails, pictures, and whatnot. And the brother had saved it all. And when I found Joe's nephew in Lewiston, he says, "I am so glad you found me. I've had all this documents waiting for somebody to be interested in it." So this is actually the original photo that the Fisher family had received. So the final interment of heroic World War II dead in 1946, Congress passed legislation. And at that time, the designated next of kin, they had four options. They could have their service member, their loved one, could be interred at a permanent American military cemetery overseas. They could be repatriated to America for interment in a private cemetery in a family plot. They could be repatriated to America for interment at a national cemetery such as Arlington. And this is interesting too. They could be returned to his or her native homeland for interment at a private cemetery located in that foreign country, contingent upon permission to enter the said country. So the next of kin had to complete and return the request of disposition of remains form in a timely manner. And if they did not return the form in the timely manner, the military contacted local Red Cross chapters, and there were several attempts to locate next of kin or to receive an answer from next of kin. And in the cases where the military and the Red Cross could not locate the next of kin or receive an answer from the next of kin, then that particular service member would be interred at an overseas military cemetery. And that was the case with Tech 5 William Curry of Portland. The Red Cross, the military, they tried to locate any of William's family members, and they could not. They did locate someone who was listed as a beneficiary in William's paperwork. They reached out to him in Connecticut, and he said that he did not have the authority to decide where William would permanently rest. So William Curry of Portland remained overseas. So who was the next of kin? So Congress also authorized the Secretary of War to establish order of next of kin. So it was the widow, the widower. In some cases, there were some females. The son over 21, followed by the daughter over 21. And if the service member didn't have any children, then it automatically went to the father was next in line, followed by the mother, brothers over 21, and sisters over 21. So it's important to note that remarriage of a widow or widower or divorce automatically nullify the surviving spouse's authority. So in some instances, in some cases, we had the widow who was made the choice. And a lot of times the parents, the mothers especially, would contact the military and say, "I want my son brought home." And they would receive a letter from the War Department saying, "That's not possible because the widow has the next of say. And in some cases, a lot of times, the families didn't even know that their sons had married. They'd met somebody at boot camp while they were at boot camp and married a local woman, and it was a quick marriage. And a lot of cases, they didn't even know that their sons had married, and they would find out after the war, when this decision came up, that yes, he was indeed married. So this caused a lot of anguish, especially for the mother of Desmond Gray. Rosalind Gray, she wanted Desmond brought home to be interred in the Gray family plot, and the military said, "We're sorry, it's not possible." Desmond's widow has the final say, who decided that Desmond would rest overseas. So during the repatriation program, the first shipment actually came from the U.S. military temporary cemetery Henri-Chapelle in July of 1947. So of the original 17,000 service members who were interred at Henri-Chapelle, about 56% came home, were repatriated. And that was a process as well. So my Uncle Paul, my my grandparents made the decision together that he would be interred overseas, and he received his final burial at Henri-Chapelle American Cemetery on July 24th, 1948. And this is his plot. And so this is a copy. This comes from his individual deceased personnel file. And as you can see, there is my great-grandfather's name, and he's checked it off, and he decided interred at a overseas military cemetery. So it was a very, and he filled it out and signed it on the 14th of March, 1947. So this was in Memorial Day, 2010. So once I figured out who Paul was and where he where he was buried, I did find his location off. I went to Arlington National Cemetery's website, and at the bottom of their homepage, they had a link for overseas burial. So I clicked on it, and it brought me up to abmc.gov, and I had a section where I could just type in the service member's name. So I typed in Paul's name, and it brought up that he was killed in action February 10th, 1945, that he was assigned to the 309th Regiment of the 78th Division, and that he was interred in plot C, row 1, grave 9. So once I had that information, I spent the next year mapping his route. And then I said to my husband and my aunt in this picture, she's Paul's first niece. We walked and his route of march, and we visited the dam where he was killed, and then we visited the cemetery. We were the first family members to visit the cemetery in Paul's grave. And during the process of research, I also found out that Paul's grave had been adopted by a Belgian couple, Jacques and Anne-Marie Corman. Anne-Marie has since passed away, but Jacques will be 92 in May. And Jacques, he remembered World War II he still does quite well. And he remembers that his uncle had a farm not too far from the cemetery. And once the area was liberated in the fall of 1944, there was a group of American service members from the 1st Division who billeted at the Jacques' uncle's farm. And one of the soldiers, Jacques remembers that one of the soldiers receiving letters from home, and they had been sprayed by perfume, and there was these big red heart kisses on the letter. And so Jacques remembered those details his whole life. And in 2004, 2005, Jacques decided to adopt a grave at Henri-Chapelle. He didn't care. He just he wanted to adopt someone. And so the organization at the time, they paired him up with a random name, and it just happened to be my great uncle Paul. And it was great meeting them. Jacques and Anne Marie, they have a daughter, Sonia, who's my age, and she speaks English. So the cemetery contacted me and said, by the way, do you know that your great uncle, his grave has been adopted? Here's the contact information. And so I sent an email to the email message address that they provided, and I'd have to say that that was one of the best emails I've ever sent because it resulted in a relationship that's still going strong 16 years, 17 years after I sent the email. And so Jacques and Anne Marie and their daughter Sonia and Sonia's two children, our families, and my husband and our three children, our families have merged. It was, like I said, it was a wonderful experience to meet this couple. And also at the time, I like this picture too because here's Paul's first niece, and I'm his second niece. And at the time, I was 20 weeks pregnant with my first daughter. So I like to look at this picture and to think that there's three generations of nieces standing with Uncle Paul. So the U.S. military cemetery Henri-Chapelle, which was the temporary military cemetery, it became a permanent cemetery in July of 1960. At the time, President Eisenhower went and dedicated the cemetery. And once he dedicated the cemetery, it was officially named Henri-Chapelle American Cemetery. And today it is overseen and administered by American Battle Monuments Commission, which takes care of all the overseas memorials and cemeteries, including Flanders from World War I. So the men of Henri-Chapelle American Cemetery, they gave their lives in these campaigns: the Hürtgen Forest, the Battle of the Bulge, the air operations over the region, and the advance into Germany. And this picture here is actually, I took this, all these pictures here are ones that I've taken. I stood here, and here you have a tablet of the missing, and these are names of MIAs and a state seal. And here you have the angel, statue of the angel overlooking the cemetery. So of the 7,992 service members who are interred at Henri-Chapelle, 50 are from Maine. So here I am. I took this picture from one of the back plots. And as you can see, these are the tablets of the missing. And of the 451 MIA service members whose names are inscribed on the tablets of the missing, 4 are from Maine. We have Parker F. Crabtree. Parker and his 2 brothers did not survive World War II. We have Alex. He lived in Waterville. His family came from Poland. We have Lieutenant Roger T. Lane. As you can see, I have an asterisk next to his name. He has been his remains have been recovered, and he was actually repatriated. He's buried in Yarmouth. I'll speak about him in a moment. And we also have Tech 5 Marshall Rousel from Augusta. Here at the end of this picture is the chapel. It's a beautiful chapel, a place to sit and have a quiet moment, thought, prayers. So who are the Dirigo men of Henri-Chapelle American Cemetery? As you can see, I did not include their towns next to their names because I wanted to say that they represented all of Maine. And I didn't want to limit them to their towns. There's Desmond Gray, Everett Green. Everett Green was very young. He was 19. William Knight. And so on this list, here's the end of the list. So there's 36 pairs of brothers interred at Henri-Chapelle and 1 trio of brothers. There's no brothers from Maine at Henri-Chapelle, but they are one pair of brother-in-laws. So we have, let me go back here. So we have George Pierce and Desmond Gray. They married sisters. And so I don't know if the sisters decided together to keep to have their husbands interred at the same cemetery overseas. I don't know. I did find and speak with George Pierce's daughter, and she said that growing up, it was very difficult to grow up without a dad, to be a war orphan, but knowing that they had cousins and that Desmond Gray's children were also orphaned, it made them feel a sense of comfort. And so, even though there's no brothers from Maine, there's a pair of brother in laws. So, tonight I'm just going to speak quickly about PFC Lewis Alley from South Bristol. So on his civilian records, he's listed as a junior. On his military records, he is not listed as a junior. And the name engraved on his marker, he does not have junior on it. So for tonight's purpose and for the book, I remained with the military's documents. And here is Lewis. So Lewis Stanley was born on the 27th of November, 1924, to Lewis and Emma of South Bristol. He had 3 siblings, 2 sisters, and 1 brother. His nickname was Junior. He completed 2 years of high school. Junior worked for a shipbuilding company named Rice Brothers in Booth Bay before entering the military on the 5th of August of 43. He served with the 120th Infantry Regiment of the 30th Infantry Division. So Lewis was killed in action on the 22nd of November, 1944 in Germany. He was interred at U.S. Military Cemetery Henri-Chapelle, the temporary cemetery in Belgium, 6 days after his death. And his parents received his personal belongings in June of 1945 after his mother wrote several letters to the military. And one thing about reading their individual deceased personnel files, some of the files contain a lot of documentation, letters, inquiries, and other files are more compressed and not as much information. But one thing about Lewis's file was that his mother wrote many letters, and I included this one. This was the first letter she wrote to the Army Effects Bureau, looking to find out what happened to her son's belongings. And she writes, "My son died in action November 22nd, 1944 in Germany. And I am writing to you to find out about his personal belongings, such as his wallet, watch, etc. Are they sent to me, his mother, or what do I have to do to receive them?" And before long, the family did start to receive some of Lewis's items. They also, and at the same time as they were receiving his items, they also received notice of where he was actually interred at the temporary cemetery. So he was interred at plot BB, row 3, grave 57. So as you can see, the families did not find out right away as to where their loved one was interred. It had to take several months for them to even know where they were located. So his dad received the request for disposition of final remains form in March of 47, and that was the one that wanted he had to fill out to state where he wanted his son to be permanently interred. And so Lewis, a lot of times the next of kins would write notes or letters. And in this case, Lewis requested that that his preference is that my son, PFC Lewis S. Alley Jr., remains be left where he gave his life for his country. I would like to have his final rest in place in Flanders Field Cemetery, if possible, which is the World War I cemetery in Belgium. That was not possible because the cemetery was closed to interments. So the military responded that he had to be interred, would be interred at Henri-Chapelle American Cemetery. That the father's request that he be interred at Flanders could not be permitted. So Louis, the son, received his final interment on the 24th of June, 1948, almost 4 years after his passing. He's in plot B, row 4, grave 36. And his sister, she did share some thoughts, and I'll leave the final slide about her brother to her. And Elizabeth said, I was 11 years old then. We used to come home for lunch every day. The school was right up here, you know. The minute I walked in the house, I knew something was wrong. We had a wood box built into the corner of the living room. And I remember clear as day. Mama was in the wood box. They sent a telegram, and then later someone came out from the War Department. I'll never forget it. And this is such a powerful statement for her. Here she was dealing with her brother's passing, but also seeing her mother in the wood box. And I'll also speak tonight. So Lincoln County only had one service member who was interred or commemorated at Henri-Chapelle. And I'm also going to speak about Lieutenant Roger T. Lane, because his remains were recovered, identified, and his next of kin wanted him buried home. So he's home in Maine now. So Roger was originally from Yarmouth and Portland. So Roger True Lane was born on the 7th of May, 1922 to Beecher and Laura Lane of Yarmouth. And he was the couple's only child. Now, Roger and Laura, that was his second marriage. So Beecher was, that was his second marriage to Laura. So Beecher had 2 children from his first marriage. So Roger actually had 2 stepsisters from his father's first marriage. And those 2 stepsisters were key in identifying his remains for their DNA because they shared the same father. Laura died on the 26th of January, 1928, and Roger was just 5 years old at the time. Beecher married Ruth Brown, his third wife, and then the family of 3 moved from Yarmouth to Portland by 1930, according to the census, and there they operated a grocery store. Now, Ruth loved Roger as her own and raised him as such. Roger graduated from Darren High School in 1940, and he was known for his boundless energy, fun times with friends, gentle nature, and love of airplanes, both model and real. He entered the military in January in 1943, and while he was training in Idaho, he met a 16-year-old girl named Betty Nelson at a bowling alley. Lane fell in love with her, and he named his P-47 Thunderbolt Scrumptious Betty in honor of the young girl who had stolen his heart. Lieutenant Lane served with the 53rd Fighter Squadron of the 36th Fighter Group. While on a bombing mission to St. Vith, Belgium on Christmas Eve 1944, he encountered 12 enemy aircrafts. Roger's plane disappeared from sight and he was never seen again. He was classified as missing in action. Beecher and Ruth received the Department telegram in January of 1945 informing them that Roger was MIA. So this particular telegram launched Beecher's search for his son in answers that lasted until Beecher's own death in 1960. Ruth Lane, even though she wasn't Roger's biological mother, she loved him like her own. She died from a broken heart in 1946. Beecher started his own investigation, wrote letters, and absolutely refused to accept Roger's disappearance. So Roger's IDPF, his individual deceased personnel file, is about 200 pages, and most of the documentation in his file is letters from Beecher to the military, wanting to know any updates. What happened to my son? Has he been found? What is the search process? Beecher was desperate to find his son. Beecher wrote his last letter about his son. It's dated 1958. And as you can read, this comes from Roger's IDPF. And so it's a heartbreaking letter. Beecher at that point was 80 years old, and he said he had grieved for Roger every day to this date. And at that point, he was still asking for information about his son. Officer Page's response is included in the IDPF, and he responded and told Beecher that Roger's remains had been deemed non-recoverable. So here is Riverside Cemetery in Yarmouth. I have visited Roger's grave. Beecher Lane died in 1960, but he remained hopeful that Roger would be found one day. And before his death, Beecher had a special headstone engraved with 3 names: his own, his wife Laura, and Roger. And Ruth Lane, who loved Roger like her own, is interred beside them. So in June of 1993, 2 men set off to explore a cow pasture in Germany. And while they were searching, their metal detectors indicated that they had found something. Men Fred Klein and Peter Drespa began to dig. And what they found was Scrumptious Betty and Lieutenant Roger T. Lane at long last. So Roger T. Lane, it took the military about 3 years to, first they had to locate a next of kin. They had to study properly identify the remains, locate the next of kin. So it was a 3-year process from when Roger was finally found to when he finally came home. And Roger is interred at Riverside Cemetery with his parents. He received a hero's welcome. It was a big event. And among the attendees was Betty Nelson, the woman who had stolen Roger's heart. She was now Betty Nelson Young. And she herself was a Gold Star mother. Her son had been killed in action in Vietnam. And this is Roger's name on the tablet of the missing. Once a service member has been located and identified, they receive a rosette next to the name. So as you can see, this is Roger's name, and he has a rosette, and there is Maine. So at Henri-Chapelle American Cemetery, there is at least 142 Jewish service members. And that includes Second Lieutenant Sidney R. Miller of Portland. He was killed in action 8 weeks after he arrived in country. He was killed in action on the 19th of September, 1944. He's interred in Plot G, Row 8, grave 60. So Sidney graduated from high school. He loved to fish, and he was an all-star athlete while he was at high school. He attended the University of Maine for 2 years. I did find his niece, a great niece, and she remembers that her grandmother used to have this picture, have the original picture, and she had it in a frame. And every Friday night for Shabbat services, she would light a candle next to Sidney's picture. And here he is. As you can see, he has a Star of David for a marker. So now I'm going to switch gears and talk a little bit about the Sentinel program. I mentioned it back in an earlier slide with the corpsmen. So the Sentinel program is open to local resident Dutch, Belgians, and the Normandy Cemetery in France. They also have an adopter program. Luxembourg American Cemetery, they have an adoption program. Of course, McGraten in the Netherlands, they do. And so what the program is that local residents can sign up to adopt a grave. And what they do is they act as family members. They visit the service member's grave at Veterans Day, Christmas, Memorial Day. They place flowers. A lot of the um, Sentinels adopters will begin to research who they've adopted. Obviously, when they do adopt a service member, the only information they have is the name, the state that the service member is from, the date of death, and the division that the service member was assigned to. So they don't know age, they don't know town, any family information, they don't have a photo. So when a service member, when a local resident signs up to be an adopter, the ultimate goal is to not only find a photo, but to also make contact with the family here in the States. So this is my friend Christophe. He's Belgian, and he has signed up. He is the sentinel of Edward Dewey. That was his nickname, Dewey, of Dewey Ricky of Portland. And Dewey was killed on the 9th of November, 1944 in the Hurricane Forest. He served with the 28th Division. And Dewey's family, Dewey married, and by the time that Dewey he was initially classified as missing in action in the Hurricane Forest. And by the time it came to make the decision of Dewey's final resting place, Dewey widow had since remarried. So the decision fell to Dewey's father. And the family at the time felt that because Dewey had been classified as missing in action, it took about several months for them to locate his remains and identify him. The family felt that the person that they did identify, the military did identify, was actually not Dewey. And they decided to have who the military said was Dewey, they decided to have him rest at an overseas military cemetery because they felt that they did not want the remains of a stranger being interred at the family plot. So Dewey Ricky remained at Henri-Chapelle, and he is interred in plot G, row 14, grave 59. Here we have David Wooten of Thomaston. He was killed in action on the 15th of February, 1945. Here he is. And here on this photo, he has been adopted by Frankie and Robbie Mears of Belgium. And David at the time, he was very young, 19 or 20. And prior to entering the military, he delivered milk. And it's interesting, Robbie is now 22, 23. And so he has surpassed when he adopted David, he was a little bit younger than David was when David died. But now Robbie has lived past the years that David never had the chance to experience. One sad note about David, back to the next of kin, was that David's parents, David's father died from grief after David had passed. And so when the military had initially contacted the family to let them know where David had been interred at the temporary cemetery, David's father was still alive. And by the time the military had contacted David's father again, David's father had passed from grief. And so David's mother was left alone to make the decision of where to have her son interred. And not only did she have to make that decision alone to navigate the grief of losing her son, but she also had to navigate the grief of losing her husband. And she explained that in a letter to the military. In the military, and this was true across the board, the mother at the time, David's mother, she had to provide proof of her husband's death certificate. So once she was able to provide that proof, the military said, okay, you are the legitimate next of kin. So I always think of David's mother. She lost her son, and then in a very short time, she lost her husband. And then she had to provide proof of his death in order to decide where their son would be interred. And she had originally wanted him brought home to be interred at the family plot in Thomaston. But the more she thought about it, the more she decided that David should rest with his comrades and in Belgium. Here we have, and this was, I was telling Shannon that I had to add this slide this morning before work. We have Sergeant Dolphus Daigle from Limestone. Dolphus was assigned to the 15th General Hospital. He was actually killed. He was working at a hospital in Liège, and he was killed by a V-1 rocket attack when it hit the hospital. He was killed in action on the 24th of November, 1944. He's interred in plot G, row 616. And one of the last letters that he sent home, he expressed that he felt fortunate, but also guilty at the same time because he was in a safe place. He had food, it was warm, he was inside a building, and he didn't have to suffer and be outdoors like his comrades were on the front lines and whatnot. And then he was killed in a V-1 attack. And then over here we have his adopters, Mathilde and Marcel. And I added in this slide because Mathilde and Marcel, a beautiful couple, they've adopted about 18 service members at Henri-Chapelle. And Marcel passed away on Tuesday at the age of 92. So I said, well, I need to add in Marcel to this lecture because he himself, his story is another whole presentation, and what these adopters do for these service members and their families. It really is a remarkable display of selflessness and love and devotion. They're signing up to adopt the graves of complete strangers and to visit their graves and place flowers. And the amount of appreciation and love for these men and for the families is quite astounding. So this photo actually comes from there was a hot air balloonist that took a ride over the cemetery, and he took a photo of Henri-Chapelle and he sent it to the office personnel, and they shared it with me. So here you have the main entrance, the columns, and these are steps down. Each side has a step. So this is plot A, B, C. My great uncle is right about here. So we have A, B, C, D, E, plot F. Plots G and H are not in the photo, but it's a beautiful view of the cemetery. So during one of my visits to the cemetery for Memorial Day on Monday, the cemetery's closed, but I like visiting because there's so many adopters who are there, placing flowers, visiting graves, and it's a great time to meet these people and to talk with them and to form a relationship. And I ran into a Dutch couple in 2019, and I asked them why are you here? Why do you adopt? And they said, these brave men died for us and for our freedom. We must always remember and appreciate what they did. And I love that quote. And when we look at this picture of Henri-Chapelle, it's important if we stop and we think about the men of Henri-Chapelle who are here, and all the languages that were spoken at home. I mean, we have English that was spoken. We have families who spoke Polish. There's families that they were not able to read the telegram informing them that their loved one had been killed or was MIA because they didn't speak English and they had to wait for someone to come home who did speak. We have Polish, Yiddish, German, the two Jewish Ritchie boys who are interred here at Henri-Chapelle. They spoke German, they spoke Flemish. There's all sorts of languages and customs and stories at the cemetery. These men, some of them were farmers, college professors. Um, they had kids. They were single. They were 18. They were 38. All sorts of stories here at the cemetery. And one of the things I love about the cemetery is that you cannot tell who is who. It's just a name on a grave, and you cannot tell demographics. And everyone is equal. Everyone is equal at Henri-Chapelle. So when I was able to find the family of Sergeant John Farrington. He was from Medway, and he was killed in action on the 21st of March of 1945. He has a lovely daughter. I've met her several times, and his sister is still with us. And she provided this quote of "This life ends, love still goes on." And once she provided that quote, I thought that pretty much sums up this project and this book. So when I started researching the main men of Henri-Chapelle, all I had was an Excel sheet with their names, their date of death, burial location at the cemetery, and the counties that they came from. So I didn't even know what towns they came from, where they called home. So it was a process for me to start from scratch. And it took a long, long time. So when I tried my best to locate and interview next of kin, I used military files, newspaper articles, historical genealogy sites, historical societies, libraries, etc. And I would send out an email, and a lot of times people were very, very helpful. And if they weren't able to provide me with an answer, they would be able to say, I can't help you, but I think this person might be able to help you. And so a network. And so the stories of Henri-Chapelle, of the main men of Henri-Chapelle, really are the accumulation of many minds and many hands and much effort from strangers who I will probably never meet, all came together and enabled me to write these stories. And so when I would write a story, the next of kin always had final approval of these stories. And if I wasn't able to locate a next of kin, I wrote the story as if I myself was the next of kin. And I call these stories in this project as a celebration of life and it's an attempt to honor the men who died and their families who grieved. I did not include causes of death in these stories, and these stories are not about battle tactics, who moved here, who fought that, who did that. It's more about who was the person there in the uniform, and who are the names, the people behind the names on the markers. So 100% of the proceeds from this book and my other two books, they go directly to my They Speak, Voices of Henri-Chapelle American Cemetery project. And one of the things that I started in 2018 was bringing over pictures of these service members to display at their graves for Memorial Day. And I started in 2018. I said, I'll just do the 38 New Hampshire service members. And then in 2019, I said, oh, I think I can bring a little bit more. And then, of course, COVID happened in 2020 and 21. So there was no visits to Belgium during those 2 years. And then 22, I said, I think I can bring some more photos to display. So each year when we go over, I bring more photos to display. And at first, when I first started in 2018, 2019, it was just myself, my 3 children, and my husband would help. And now it has really escalated and expanded to a lot of people help display these pictures. And so last year I brought over, I want to say it was close to 1,300 pictures. It seems like a lot, but in the scheme of things, when you look at the cemetery and you see almost 8,000 graves, and you look, and I'm putting out 1,300 photos, it's a little, there's still a lot of markers that need a picture in front of in front. But this one is Roland Marquis, his picture here, and Dana Edwards. I like his story. He loved the Glenn Miller Band. He was into big band music. And so when I place the pictures in front, it's nice for the visitors to walk by and to see the faces of these men. And I also try to incorporate family photos as well. If I have a family photo of the service member with his wife and their children, I will put that out first as opposed to a military photo. But if I don't have a family photo, of course, I will put out the military photo. So this quote I picked up. My family and I visited a plantation in North Carolina not too long ago. And while we were there, I asked the director, the curator of the plantation, if they had a list of where the slave cemetery was located. And they do not know the location, but they did have a booklet where the names of the slaves and the dates that they died. And on the front of this booklet was this grave: as long as you say my name, I live. And I think it's a beautiful quote, and it really captures the essence of this project and what I try to do and what the Sentinels try to do. So I established They Speak, Voices of Henri-Chapelle American Cemetery in 2016 because I wanted to place a wreath at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldiers at Arlington in Virginia. And I was not able to because I was just a civilian. They only allow organizations. So I said, okay. So I reapplied as the director of They Speak, Voices of Henri-Chapelle American Cemetery, and they approved my request. So I was able to place a beautiful wreath that my husband made at the Tomb of the Unknowns during Wreaths Across America in 2016. So They Speak is dedicated to all the service members of Henri-Chapelle American Cemetery. So this is my last slide. I can leave it up. It has my email address if anybody would like to email me questions or whatnot. My Facebook page is called They Speak Voices of Henri-Chapelle American Cemetery. If anyone is interested in my 3 books about Henri-Chapelle, there's the New Hampshire book, The Granite Men of Henri-Chapelle. There's the Vermont book, The Green Mountain Boys of Henri-Chapelle, and of course the Dirigo Men. All 3 books are available online or can be ordered from any bookstore. And like I said, 100% of the proceeds go back to the project, back towards the cost to display photos. And sometimes, too, I'm now entering placing flowers at graves. If I can't find a photo, I'll place flowers. So all the proceeds from the books go right back to the project. So I can open it up to questions if anybody has a question.
Thank you so much, Amy. This was wonderful. I have to say that, well, first of all, I'd like to let everyone know that Amy's here because a member of ours, Katie DuPont, suggested we bring her in for a talk. And right away, I thought that sounds really cool. But I didn't realize until you got into your speaking how not only cool this is, but how incredibly beautiful your project is. I'm so thrilled, Katie, for the introduction, and Amy, that you have taken time to speak with us tonight. Anne has made a comment that I'd like to share because I kind of felt the same way. She said, having visited American cemeteries in France, your poignant presentation brings tears to my eyes as well. Thank you for bringing these men's heroism to our attention. And she wants to add how dedicated the Americans are who tend to these cemeteries, and just a heartfelt thank you. And I felt, that same sense of there's an emotion and appreciation for what you've done. Thank you so much. Yeah.
And one of the things about these ABMC sites is that they are beautifully and meticulously maintained. Every ABMC site that I have visited, it's just breathtaking to stand at the entrance and to just look across not only the markers, the white marble markers, but to also look at the vegetation and the lawns. I was at McGraw one time, and the lawn crew, the grounds crew, there was a gentleman. He was on his hands and knees with a big pair of scissors, shears, and he was actually on his hands and knees snipping the blades of grass. So the level of dedication at these cemeteries to these men is, it's something that I wish I could convey, but it's something that I think every person would need to experience on their own to appreciate and fully understand.
It sounds like through this project, you've joined a group of people that I didn't realize existed who are so dedicated to the care of these places. And Jim has just written in how amazing and extraordinary this is. And I totally agree. So any more questions, go ahead, write them in the chat. I've got one right here for you, and I think we've got time for a few more. So Dan, it looks like you have a question. Go ahead and write that in.
I don't have a question. I met
Oh,
Amy and
okay.
Ryan a few years ago at Henri-Chapelle.
Oh, okay. Oh, Dan
And,
wants to see
and it's,
welcome.
hi, Amy. And she started that year, I think it was 3.5 years ago, with about 600 pictures. And it's really a yeoman's job placing them. She does it with her children too. And now hearing that you're up to 1,300, it's just incredible. But Amy is sort of the heart of the website. The adopters, when I first came onto the website, it was probably around when it first started or so, because each of the various cemeteries have Facebook pages. And somebody was looking for me because her father was Frank Lovell, and Mary Lovell, his daughter, wrote a book based on his diary, and my father's name was mentioned in it. But my uncle, his younger brother, died December 44. We found out, we found out in the diary that he was killed when my uncle and 3 other soldiers tripped a landmine that the Germans planted. Now, we never knew And if my father knew, the greatest generation, they didn't talk about it. He went to visit him in 1950, and then I went in 1996, and my second visit was a couple of years ago. But it's very moving and very emotional when you go to the cemetery, especially if you know somebody that's buried there. Now, when I asked somebody to take a picture of my uncle's grave, uh, I had more than a couple of pictures that were posted on Facebook. And when I was there on Memorial Day, I met some of these people and all different age groups, people into the 70s and 80s, and people that are 30, and they're bringing their children that are maybe 10 years old. So they're going to have that continuity of taking care of the graves. The locals really appreciate what Americans have done, really to save Europe. And Americans don't get it. When you go and visit an American war cemetery, you get it. You could just walk around. We walked around the Florence Cemetery when we were there and was speaking to the superintendent, who was from Brooklyn, coincidentally, which made me, we had a little bit of a bind. But the people, even at Henri-Chapelle American War Cemetery, Amandine,
Mhm.
she's a sweetheart. When I first met her, I didn't realize she was a kid, quote unquote. Maybe she's 30 years old right now. But she and whoever the superintendent is, I don't know who it is right now. Uh, he was from Brooklyn also a few years ago. They're very gracious. And if you go, we when my wife and I visited, the superintendent picked us up at the train station and he explains everything to you. They get one or two family members or NOK, next of kin, a week, and they treat them with the utmost respect. And we even got that at the cemetery 3 years ago. Uh, and like as Amy said, like they're walking around with little clippers. That cemetery looks good every single day, not on Memorial Day, not on Veterans Day, on March 15th and on April 30th. Every day that cemetery looks good. And kudos to them and to the next generation. And, like I would always say to these people that have adopted graves or sent pictures, come to New York. I will take you around. I will, we'll go for pizza. I'll give you the tour, whatever you want. And a woman and her husband, mid-30s, did come to New York, and it was nice meeting them. It was uh, uh, it's like solidifying a relationship. How can I have a relationship with somebody that lives in Maastricht? But I do, I
Right.
do. We've communicated, and I don't know.
Dan,
That's
thank
just
you. Thank you for sharing that. That's cool. And that's something that I heard coming from Amy too, is that there's a community and
yes.
and that's wonderful. Um,
So Dan's uncle is Benjamin Hammer, and
Hammer.
he's interred in Plot G. Just so we can say his name, Benjamin. Yeah, Benjamin Hammer. Thank you, Dan. I met Dan at the cemetery in person 3 years ago, so it's always nice to hear a familiar voice.
this
And
is
if you weren't so far away, I would have been up at the library a couple of weeks ago.
It's okay.
I'm glad that you were able to join us today. This is awesome. If you don't mind, I'll turn to another question that came in. I thought this was interesting. Amy, someone asked, for somebody interested in starting a similar project,
Sure.
what advice would you give just for getting started? It sounds
Oh,
like you spent a lot of time kind of refining your technique and your approach, but
sure.
how would you
Sure.
start something new?
How would you start something new? Well, I don't know if this person is interested in like a particular name, a
They just
particular.
said a historical or genealogy project, so sort of I think maybe general, starting off on
Sure,
something. Yeah.
sure. Um, they could, a lot of times, for me, this was with, because I had a reason because of Paul. Um, but for some people who start a project like this, all they do is visit a local cemetery, and they walk among the graves, and they feel a name speak to them. And that's what I try to tell people, is that you have to have like a passion for what you're researching. So if there's a name, just start very basic. Go to visit the local cemetery in town and look at the veteran graves and see if there's any date on the grave, the inscription, the name, anything that jumps out at you. And I call those little things winks from heaven because you have to feel a connection. And that would be my suggestion, to start visiting a local cemetery. If somebody is interested in researching the other Maine service members who are interred at Ardennes American Cemetery or the Netherlands or Normandy, I'd be happy to help you set up. I did work with a high school, and that was their senior project. They researched the New Hampshire service members of the Ardennes American Cemetery. Cool. And so they enjoyed that. And then their big presentation, their big thesis, final capstone, was presenting it at the Wright Museum in Wolfboro. And so I had a Dutch friend, Ben. He came over and he joined us in person to meet the students and to talk about why he's adopted graves. So there's all different possibilities. I'm not sure if that answers the question.
Yeah. Well, definitely the person who asked, I wonder if they might even reach out to you afterwards. So it's good that your emails are. Thank you. And then does Dan Friedman sound like a familiar name to you? Because Dan has another Dan has a question for you. Dan, I don't know if you're off mute, but you're welcome to go ahead and ask.
Yeah. Amy, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear
you.
Dan. Hi, nice to see you.
What a nice surprise.
Dan Hammer. This is Dan Friedman from Sittard in the Netherlands. Nice to meet you. I'm also, I was born in New York City and I lived there for 24 years. I joined the military and I wound up meeting a lovely Dutch lady who I married. And that's one of the reasons why I'm still here in the Netherlands. But I wanted to say first to Amy, you're doing a wonderful job. I'm really glad that I joined this webinar because I learned so much about the work that you do. Now, Amy and I have known each other, I think, since 2019.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. I have adopted a grave of an American soldier at Margraten American Cemetery in the Netherlands. So in most cases, the adopters of the graves are from local people or from people of the Netherlands, in my case. But I've been living here now for 27 years. And 16 years ago, I asked to adopt the grave of a Jewish soldier because I'm Jewish from nationality, from my religion, and I was granted the grave of David Weinstein, a Captain David Weinstein. So I can also offer certain religious prayers at grave sites, and that's one of the reasons why I know Amy, because Amy came in touch with me and she wanted me to be able to say the Mourner's Kaddish for some of the soldiers that are buried at Henri-Chapelle. So that's when we met. And it's been an interesting ride, Amy, I must say, over the years.
It has, Dan.
It's nice. Your family is very nice. The people that we've come in contact with. Amy also goes outside the cemeteries on occasion, maybe more occasions than I'm aware of. But we went to a location in Belgium where Murray Zappler and Kurt Jacobs were executed on the side of the road during the war. They were two Jewish soldiers who were doing, what do we call that? We call that...
they were Ritchie boys. They were
Ritchie, yes.
Interpreters. Yeah,
They were
translators.
they
Yeah.
were interpreters, and they in some cases they were also uh, interrog-
Interrogators.
interrogating some of the German soldiers who were held captive. And Amy had invited me because wherever there are Jewish soldiers, Amy knows that I can help, and she also knows that I can help sometimes with Christian soldiers as well as one of our chaplains from the American Legion group that I'm part of, uh, joined with people at Henri-Chapelle to give a prayer. So Amy does Amy does go out of her way. I'm amazed at how much you do, and I just want to say it's a pleasure to know you, Amy,
Well,
and
thanks,
keep
Steve.
up the good work. And send my regard to Ryan and your family,
I
and
will.
best wishes to you. Okay,
And
thank.
I have to say about Dan Friedman, he is one of the best people I know, and he's never told me no. I know if I've got a wild thought thought that I want to do a plan, and I have to, and it's like, okay, I'm going to contact Dan, because Dan, if it's, he's never said no, he says this person can, or yes, that can be done. And Dan is, like I said, he's one of the best individuals I know, and I'm so happy to have him in my life, because he really does go out of his way for these service members, and to remember and honor their lives.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Amy.
Thanks,
Thank
Dan.
you.
And I checked, there's nobody else named Dan, unfortunately. But if there were, I'd call them next. David Daly did send in a message. And I don't know, David, if you'd like to take yourself off mute and share it, that's welcome. But I'll go ahead and read what he said until he does that, if he does that. But he said he visits the cemetery several times a year and has adopted 5 soldiers buried there. And he's shared contact information for anyone looking up a relative in that cemetery or any overseas American cemetery. So oh, you know what? I actually don't know if that link came through. So, David, I'm not sure that I saw that link, but he also is sharing the organization that assigns the sentinels that Amy talked about. So I'll go ahead and put that in the chat for anyone who's interested.
You said his name was David, Shannon?
David Daly. Does that sound familiar?
It does not, but thank you, David, for
Yeah. Oh,
commenting.
actually, it looks like he might be off mute, so maybe
Oh,
he would like
okay.
to share with us.
Yeah, I'm just an American from Wisconsin, a retired military person, and I was on a vacation in the Ardennes in southern Belgium, and I came across a group of 5 American soldiers who died there the day before Christmas in 1944. And I was amazed by what the local people still do to this day. It's a town of about 100 people, and they march from where these men died to the top of the hill where they have erected a memorial for them. They're all buried at Henri-Chapelle, and they were all adopted. And I wanted to adopt one, and I met a man from Belgium who had like adopted 10 of them. And I just said, hey, can you cut one loose? Because I know the story of these guys. And I didn't do it as extensive as you have done, but it's enabled me to get in contact with their families back in the United States and tell them at the very least their loved ones are very well taken care of. They're thought of all the time over there. And I just wish our children over here knew as much about our history as the Belgian people know about our history,
Right.
all the way from young to old. They're so appreciative, they're so welcoming, and I wish we had more of that here.
Sure. Shannon, wait, is it Dave Daniels?
No, Daily.
Oh, Daly, I'm sorry. Um, I'm hoping Dave actually to find a way to, that's one of my like long-term goals, is to somehow bring Belgium here and bring here to Belgium, to, because the, you know, involving the youth and students is key, and it's key for relationships, and not only to learn about our history and these men, but to also continue the peace and the relationship that these men died and fought for. And so one of the things that I would love to do, like I said, is to somehow create and merge relationship between school children here in the States with school children in Belgium around the cemetery, so that we can learn from each other and make those relationships.
I think that'd be a great project, and you'll find that it's a lot easier to involve school children of European countries
Yes.
because they all do it.
Right.
They want to know and they want to talk to Americans. And
Mm-hmm.
I think if the youth over here knew that they could have like instant Facebook files or Instagram files over there and tell stories back and forth, I mean, it would be something great if you can make that
Yes,
happen.
it would be. If there's any teachers in the audience who would be willing to give it a try, the first step is, to achieve any kind of project is the first step, and we just have to get that first step going. So if there's any teachers or people who know educators who might be interested, please feel free to send me an email, and we can certainly see what kind of trouble we can cause.
Well, and I'd be willing to handle the Belgian, and because I speak German and French, and I know
Perfect.
teachers over there and some authors, French authors that
Mm-hmm.
they would love to have something like this. They're just afraid of trying to get involved in America because political things going on. They're kind of scared, but they would really enjoy it. So if you get that far, let me know. And
Sure, sure. Yeah, you have my email there,
yes,
and send me an email, and we can start a dialogue to get this moving,
perfect.
to
And
get
thanks for
something
doing
going.
this. Very
Well,
interesting presentation.
well, thank you for commenting and for your efforts as well.
Thank you, David, for speaking up. Thanks, Amy. I think we have time for one more question.
Okay.
And oh, I've had one right in front of my face, and now I minimize the screen. Hold on a second. Okay, I think this is a great one to end on. What is the one story or moment that has stayed most strongly with you through your work, if you can even think of just one?
Ah, what's the one story? Oh dear, there's been so many. There's been so many stories, and just oh gosh, let me think here. I'd have to say they're all my favorites. They're they're all so special, and it's I'd have to say, and now I feel like a mom choosing between her kids.
We won't hold it against you if you accidentally pick the wrong one.
I'd have to say one that really sticks out in me is when I find their picture or a story, I have to smile to myself. And usually I work on this in the middle of the night. So I have nobody to tell and to celebrate with because my family's asleep. But I have to say that one of the stories in the pictures would have to be um, I'm going to go with Kurt Jacobs. He was the Jewish Richie boy, one of the Jewish Richie boys who was executed, and him and Mo Zappler. And I started looking for his photo. I'm still looking for Mo Zappler's photo. I haven't been able to find it, but I started looking for both of their photos, and I ended up going with Kirk first because that's just how the research flowed. And I'd have to say that I did not want their executioners. I did not want those who pulled the triggers to be the last people to see their faces. And I wanted to be able to put their photos in front of their Star of David markers. And when I do with Kurtz, I do smile because it's like, yeah, there you are. Um, his search, he was born in Berlin. He immigrated to Buffalo, him and his sister, the family. His mother, long story short, they couldn't get his father out in time. And his father, Jacob, and then I ended up researching Jacob's, because then it was, Jacob died. He was murdered at Theresienstadt. And Kurt entered the military, and he was assigned as a Ritchie boy, as an interrogator. And that search, and his name inscribed on his headstone is Jacobs. And so I received, and I wasn't able to find anything, and other books, authors don't have photos of him. So long story short, I finally received his individual deceased personnel file. And as I'm reading through it, come to find out his last name was Jacobson, Sohn. He changed it, he abbreviated it to Jacobs when he moved to Buffalo. So once I had that piece of information, it was like a floodgate opened. And so coincidentally, as soon as I had that information, I received an email from the director of the Jewish Federation of Buffalo, New York, found my Facebook page and contacted me to see if I had any information about a service member named Kurt Jacobs. And I had to laugh when I called her, because I said, your timing is perfect, because I just received his IDPF. I know his name, his real last name. So long story short, I just was looking for his photo. In the search for his photo, it took me, and I was doing all of this from my couch at night after everybody went to bed, from my phone in the school pickup line, waiting for my kids, the waiting room to get tires changed on my van. And the search took me from New Hampshire to Berlin. From Berlin, it took me to Prague, then back across the ocean to Hana in Buffalo, to Washington, D.C. at the Holocaust Museum, to Camp Ritchie in Hagerstown, Maryland. And finally, sitting up, and I'm looking at all this, the pieces that Hana and I had we sharing information. Long story short, I was able to find a clue in all of that mess that we had collected, put together, and all those pieces to the puzzle. It led me straight across the country to the USC Shoah Foundation, the Steven Spielberg's foundation. And Kurt's nephew in 1997 decided to give his testimony and honor his family's story by sharing what their experiences, and by sharing his uncle Kurt's photo. So I ordered his testimony, not knowing what would be in it. And there I was late at night, all by myself, going through the nephew's, Ernest Sternglass's testimony. And there was Kurt's photo. And so I couldn't believe it. So I immediately emailed the director of the Jewish Federation in Buffalo. And I said, I think we got Kurt. I said, I think we got Kurt. And so I sent her the tape, and she looked through it. And then she sent it on to another researcher from the Holocaust Museum who had joined our quest. And they're the three of us. We were so excited. And when I saw Kurt's face, it was like, gotcha. I've traveled all across from New Hampshire to Berlin to Prague to DC to Buffalo to California, and you finally got your picture. And I remember when I put his picture out on display for Memorial Day, I was like, for me, that was a big, and I don't want to be rude and I don't want to offend anybody, but for me, that was a big, I don't want to say stick my tongue out, but that was a big, wanted to say a middle finger to those, those who pulled the trigger. And for me, that was, yeah, we've got Kurt's face. you didn't win. So that's one of my favorite stories.
Thank you, Amy, so much. It
Thank
is
you.
actually it's 7:01 right now, which I
Oh
think is
gosh.
probably a perfect time to end. Meanwhile, I want to mention I'm getting all kinds of lovely messages of thanks from
Okay.
people, a lot of compliments on your work, and I'm so happy and grateful to you for sharing this with us. Really, it really taught me a lot, and I think a lot of folks are really appreciative. So thank you.
Well, thank you all.
I have recorded this, so probably what I'll do is take a little time to get the recording ready. I'll stream it on YouTube, and all of you will get an email to let you know when the link is there, and feel free to share it with anybody who wasn't here tonight.
Okay, well, thank you, Shannon. Thank you all. Thank you all very much.
Take care, everyone. Have a great night. And I'll see you again next week. Same time, same place.
Oh, we still